My stepdad manipulated my mother into selling him the company I built, then fired me immediately to cut costs. He thought he owned everything, but he forgot the flagship product's patents were in my name. So I made one call and destroyed his investment. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The migraine had started somewhere between the quarterly budget review and the final quality check on the new Titan line, thumping against my right temple like a persistent, angry knuckle. I pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes, trying to encourage the fluorescent afterimages to fade. It was 4:45 p.m. on a Tuesday, usually the time I would be down on the factory floor doing the shift change walkthrough, shaking hands with the machinists and checking the calibration logs. But today the summons had been specific: boardroom now. I gathered my notebook, the leather-bound one my father had given me a decade ago when we first opened the shop, and stood up. I felt physically drained, a bone-deep exhaustion that came from 3 months of 70-hour weeks preparing for the Titan launch. But it was a good exhaustion. We were profitable. We were stable. For the first time since Dad died, our company, was safe. Or so I thought. When I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the conference room, the air conditioning hit me first, followed by the silence. It wasn't the comfortable silence of a meeting waiting to start. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a room where a decision had already been made. Margaret, my mother, was sitting at the far end of the long mahogany table. She wouldn't look at me. Her gaze was fixed intently on a spot of varnish near her clasped hands, her shoulders hunched inward as if she were trying to make herself physically smaller. Frank sat at the head of the table. He was leaning back in my father's old chair, the leather creaking as he shifted his weight. He wore that expression I had come to loathe over the last 2 years, a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes, smug and entirely self-satisfied. He tapped a manicured finger on a stack of documents in front of him. "Megan," Frank said, his voice smooth, lacking any warmth. "Sit down. We need to have a little chat about the future." I remained standing, my grip tightening on my notebook. "I have the shift change in 10 minutes, Frank. Can this wait? The Titan sensors are still acting up on line 3, and I need to." "Line 3 isn't your concern anymore," he interrupted, his voice dropping an octave, becoming harder. "Sit." My stomach did a slow, sick flip. I pulled out the chair closest to the door and sat, never taking my eyes off him. "What's going on, Mom?" I looked at her, pleading for eye contact. Margaret flinched but didn't look up. "Listen to Frank, Megan," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Your mother and I have been discussing the direction of Aerotech," Frank said, clasping his hands behind his head. "We've come to the conclusion that the current management structure is bloated, inefficient. We're trimming the fat." "Bloated?" I laughed, a short, incredulous sound. "Frank, I run operations, design, and HR. I'm doing 3 jobs for the salary of one. I haven't taken a vacation in 4 years. How is that bloated?" Frank leaned forward, the smile widening into something predatory. "It's not about effort, sweetie. It's about ownership. See, your mother and I made a deal this morning. She's officially sold her controlling interest in the company to me. Aerotech is mine now, 100%. The room seemed to tilt. "Mom," I choked out, you sold it without telling me." "It was too much stress for her," Frank answered for her, smooth as oil. "I'm taking the burden off her shoulders, and as the new sole owner, I've decided to bring in my own team. People who understand my vision, which means your services are no longer required." He slid a single sheet of paper across the polished wood. It stopped just inches from my hand. "Termination of employment," Frank read the header aloud, savoring the words. "Effective immediately. Severance is 2 weeks, provided you sign the NDA and non-compete attached." I stared at the paper. The letters swam before my eyes. This building, these machines, the people outside that door, I had raised this company from the ashes of my father's death. I was the one who figured out the alloy mixture for the new chassis. I was the one who stayed until 3 a.m. when the CNC machines broke down. "You can't do this," I said, my voice shaking with a mix of rage and shock. "I built this place." "You worked here," Frank corrected, standing up and buttoning his jacket. "And now you don't. Security will escort you to your desk to collect your personal effects. You have 20 minutes. "Mom," I yelled. Standing up. "Are you going to let him do this? He doesn't know how to run the lines. He doesn't know the suppliers." Margaret finally looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, wet with tears, but her jaw was set in a way that told me she had been thoroughly coached. "It's business, Megan. Frank knows what's best for the family assets. Please, just don't make a scene." Frank chuckled, walking over to the window to look out at the parking lot. "Yeah, don't make a scene, Meg. You're fired. Pack your stuff." The cruelty of it, the casual dismantling of my entire identity in under 5 minutes, hit me harder than a physical blow. I looked at the man who had invaded our lives and the woman who had let him, and I felt something inside me fracture. It wasn't just a firing. It was an execution of my entire life's work. The walk from the conference room to my office felt like a funeral procession where I was both the mourner and the corpse. The office was an open-plan layout, something I had implemented to encourage collaboration, which meant there was nowhere to hide. Every head turned as I walked by. The whispers started immediately, a low hum of confusion and concern. "Megan, is everything okay?" It was Sarah, the floor manager. She had a clipboard in her hand and grease on her cheek. She looked at me, then at the 2 uniformed security guards trailing 3 feet behind me like I was a criminal who was about to steal the copper wiring. "I'm fine, Sarah," I lied, my voice sounding hollow and metallic to my own ears. "Just handling some administrative things." I couldn't tell them. I couldn't break down here. Not in front of the team I had mentored, the people whose mortgages depended on the contracts I secured. I reached my office, a glass-walled box in the corner, and closed the door, though it did little to block the view of the guards standing with their arms crossed outside. I grabbed a cardboard box from the supply closet and started blindly sweeping things into it. A framed photo of my dad and me at the groundbreaking ceremony. Clunk, my lucky stapler. Clunk, the director of the year plaque the staff had voted to give me. Clunk. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped a ceramic mug. It shattered on the floor, the sound loud and violent in the quiet office. I froze, staring at the shards of the mug that said "World's Okayest Boss." I wanted to scream. I wanted to pick up the chair and throw it through the glass wall. I looked up and saw Frank standing on the mezzanine level above the factory floor. He was watching me. He had a styrofoam cup of coffee in his hand, and he raised it in a mock toast when our eyes met. He looked like a king surveying his new kingdom, drunk on the power he had just stolen. My mother was nowhere to be seen. She had likely retreated to his car, unable to witness the wreckage she had authorized. I grabbed the box, leaving the shards on the floor. I wouldn't clean it up. Let him clean it up. "Ma'am, we need your badge and keys," one of the guards said as I stepped out. It was heavy-set Dave. He couldn't look me in the eye. "I'm sorry, Megan. Orders." "It's okay, Dave, I know." I unclipped my ID badge, the one with the access chip to every secure room in the building, and dropped it into his hand. It felt like handing over a limb. I walked out the back exit, the rain starting to drizzle down, turning the gray asphalt of the parking lot black. I threw the box into the passenger seat of my sedan and climbed in, locking the doors immediately. For a long time, I just sat there. The engine was off. The rain drummed a chaotic rhythm on the roof. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, gasping for air, the panic finally overtaking the shock. What am I going to do? I was 32 years old. I had no savings because I had reinvested every spare dollar back into the company to buy the new machinery Frank now owned. I had no job. I had just been betrayed by the only family I had left. I looked up at the building one last time. The neon sign for Aerotech flickered in the gloom. Frank was probably already calling the investors, bragging about how he had cut the overhead cost of my salary. He was probably already planning to sell off the inventory and strip the company for parts. That had always been his style: fast cash, zero longevity. He had the building, he had the machines, he had the workforce. I started the car, the wipers slapping angrily against the windshield. I put the car in reverse, tears streaming down my face, blurring the red taillights of the cars around me. But as I shifted into drive, a sudden, sharp memory cut through the fog of my grief. It was a memory of my father, sitting in his hospital bed, holding a thick legal document, his voice weak but his eyes fierce. "They can take the building, Meg. Buildings are just bricks, but the mind, the ideas, those are yours, I made sure of it." I hit the brakes, the car jerking to a halt before I even left the spot. I looked back at the factory. Frank was up there, thinking he had won the war because he had captured the castle. A cold, strange calm washed over me, drying the tears instantly. He had the factory, but he had forgotten one crucial thing. To understand why Frank's oversight was fatal, you have to understand what Aerotech actually was. My father, Arthur, hadn't been a businessman, he was an inventor. He was the kind of man who saw the world in schematics. When I was 10, instead of a dollhouse, he bought me a soldering iron. We built this company from a garage operation into a premier manufacturer of high-precision aerospace sensors. But Dad was sick for a long time before he passed. In those final years, while the cancer slowly ate away at his strength, he became obsessed with protecting me. He had seen how vultures circled small businesses when a founder died. He wrote a very specific will, and he created a very specific trust. When he died, the ownership of Aerotech, the LLC, went to my mother, Margaret. He trusted her to look after me. He wanted her to be secure. I was 22, fresh out of engineering school, and I stepped up to run the day-to-day operations. I poured my soul into that place. I developed the Titan sensor, a device that revolutionized how altitude pressure is measured in drones. It was lighter, cheaper, and more accurate than anything on the market. It was the product that put us on the map. It was the product that generated 90% of our revenue. I didn't take a salary for the first 3 years. I lived in a studio apartment the size of a shoebox. I missed my best friend's wedding because a shipment was late. I sacrificed my 20s on the altar of Aerotech because I believed I was building a legacy for my family. Then came Frank. Frank appeared 2 years ago at a Chamber of Commerce mixer. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my car and smelled like sandalwood and expensive gin. He introduced himself as a business visionary and a turnaround consultant, though if you asked him what businesses he had turned around, the answers were always vague. "Various holdings in the tri-state area," he'd say with a wink. He swept my mother off her feet. Margaret was lonely. She had been grieving for years, and suddenly here was this charismatic, silver-haired man who told her she was beautiful and, more importantly, told her she deserved to relax. "Why are you worrying about spreadsheets, darling?" He would coo at dinner, pouring her another glass of wine. "That's what you have Megan for. Or better yet, why not sell? We could travel. Europe, Bali." At first, I tried to be happy for her, but then I started noticing the changes. Frank started coming to the office, first just for lunch, then sitting in on meetings. He would interrupt my engineers with buzzwords he didn't understand. He started criticizing my organizational charts. "You're too soft on the staff, Megan," he told me once, putting a hand on my shoulder that lingered just a second too long, making my skin crawl. "You treat them like people. They're assets, squeezable assets." I pushed back. I banned him from the production floor after he tried to tell a master welder how to hold a torch. I thought I had won that battle. But I lost the war because I wasn't fighting on the home front. Frank changed tactics. He stopped coming to the office and started working on Mom. He isolated her. He convinced her that my long hours weren't dedication, but incompetence. He whispered that I was trying to push her out, that I didn't respect her ownership. "She treats you like a silent partner, Margaret." I heard him say once when I stopped by their house to drop off groceries. It's disrespectful. You're the owner. You should be cashing out, not letting your daughter play CEO with your retirement money. He was a parasite. A polished, handsome, dangerous parasite looking for a host. And now he had successfully detached the host from its defenses. He had convinced Margaret to sign over the LLC. He held the keys to the kingdom. I sat in my car, rain blurring the world outside, and opened the glove compartment. I dug past the tire gauge and the spare napkins until I felt the crinkle of a thick envelope. I kept a copy of my father's trust documents in there. I don't know why, maybe intuition. I pulled them out and flipped to Schedule B, Intellectual Property and Licensing. Frank had bought Aerotech LLC. The LLC owned the machines, the lease on the building, the desks, and the coffee maker. But the patent for the Titan sensor, the proprietary alloy formula, the design schematics, they weren't owned by Aerotech LLC. My father had placed them in the Arthur and Meghan Family Trust. Beneficiary, Meghan. Sole trustee, Meghan. For 10 years, I had been licensing the Titan IP to Aerotech LLC for a fee of $1 per year. It was a formality, a way to keep costs down for the family business. I looked at the signat. Your line on the licensing agreement. Revocable by the licensor, Meghan, with 24 hours written notice. Frank didn't just fire his operations director. He fired the owner of the product he was trying to sell. I wiped my face, put the car in gear, and drove out of the parking lot. I wasn't crying anymore. I was heading to a lawyer. I didn't go home. I couldn't. My apartment felt too quiet, too much like a place where I would just sit and let the gravity of the situation crush me. Instead, I drove 45 minutes to the outskirts of the city, to a small, unassuming brick building with a brass plaque that read Henderson and Associates, Estate Law. Mr. Henderson had been my father's lawyer for 30 years. He was 70 now, a man who smelled of pipe tobacco and old paper, and he was the only person left in the world I trusted completely. I didn't have an appointment, but his receptionist, a kind woman named Betty who had given me lollipops when I was 6, waved me right in when she saw my face. Mr. Henderson was organizing files. He looked up, peering over his spectacles. Meghan, I didn't expect to see you until the annual trust review in November. Is everything all right? I sat down, the leather chair sighing beneath me. I placed the wrinkled envelope from my glove compartment on his desk. Frank fired me, I said, the words tasting like ash. He convinced Mom to sell him the LLC. He owns Aerotech now. He kicked me out, Mr. Henderson. He gave me 20 minutes to pack. Mr. Henderson's face darkened. He slowly took off his glasses and set them down. Margaret sold the controlling interest without consulting the board. She is the board, I reminded him bitterly. Or she was. Frank manipulated her. He said I was bloated overhead. He's going to strip it, Elias. I know he is. He's going to sell off the inventory, fire the senior staff, and cash out. Mr. Henderson leaned back, steepling his fingers. He can certainly try, but if he fired you, that changes the landscape significantly. He reached for the envelope I had placed on the desk, but he didn't open it. He didn't need to. He had written the documents inside. Do you remember the conversation your father and I had with you 3 days before he passed? He asked softly. I nodded, fighting back a fresh wave of tears. He said he wanted to make sure I was safe, that no matter what happened with Mom's grief or the market, I would have a parachute. Arthur was a brilliant engineer, Mr. Henderson said, opening a drawer and pulling out a thick file of his own. But he was a better judge of character. He worried that Margaret's pliable nature might be a liability. That's why we structured the IP the way we did. He opened the file and spread a document out on the desk. It was the Master Licensing Agreement. Clause 4, Section B, Mr. Henderson read aloud, his finger tracing the line. The licensor, that's the trust, meaning you, grants Aerotech LLC a non-exclusive, revocable license to manufacture and sell products utilizing the Titan sensor patent and related trade secrets. He looked up at me, and the revocation clause. I recited it from memory. I had read it 100 times, never thinking I'd use it. This license may be revoked by the licensor at any time, for any reason, with written notice of 24 hours. Frank purchased the LLC, Mr. Henderson said, a small, grim smile touching his lips. He purchased the factory, the machines, the inventory, and the client list, but he did not purchase the right to make the product. Currently, he is manufacturing the Titan sensor solely because you, out of the goodness of your heart, allow him to do so for $1 a year. If I revoke it, I asked, my voice steadying, what happens? If he continues to manufacture or sell a single unit after the notice period expires, he is committing willful patent infringement. We can file for an immediate injunction. We can freeze his assets. We can sue him for every dime of revenue he generates. Mr. Henderson paused. Megan, if you send this letter, you aren't just firing a warning shot. You are nuking the factory. Production stops. Sales stop. The company is effectively dead in the water until he negotiates a new license with you. And I assume the price will no longer be $1. No, I said, a cold resolve settling in my chest. It won't be $1. Are you ready for the fallout? He asked gently. Margaret will be caught in the crossfire. She chose her side, I said, though it hurt to say it. Draft the letter, Elias. Send it via courier. I want him to get it first thing tomorrow morning. While Mr. Henderson's paralegal began drafting the formal cease and desist, I spent the next 3 hours in his conference room using my laptop. If I was going to war, I needed to know exactly who I was fighting. I had never looked too deeply into Frank's background before. I had just accepted him as the annoyingly vague consultant. But no. With the adrenaline of revenge fueling me, I dug deep. I used the LexisNexis account Mr. Henderson let me borrow. I searched for Frank Miller in the business registries of the tri-state area. Too common. I cross-referenced with his phone number, which I had from the company directory. Bingo! Frank wasn't just Frank Miller. He was listed as an officer for Miller Holdings, Visionary Capital, and Apex Turnaround. I pulled the records for Apex Turnaround, dissolved 3 years ago, bankruptcy filing. I pulled the records for Visionary Capital, dissolved 5 years ago, lawsuit settled out of court for fraud. The pattern was clear. He would find a small, family-owned business, usually one with an aging owner or a recent death in the family, buy in, leverage the assets to take out massive loans, pay himself consulting fees, and then vanish when the company imploded under the debt. He wasn't a businessman, he was a vampire. And he had just sunk his teeth into my father's legacy. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah, the floor manager. He's shouting at the schedulers. He wants to double production on the Titan line. Says we need to ship 5,000 units by Friday for a quick cash injection. He's bypassing QC. I stared at the screen. He was trying to pump and dump the inventory before anyone realized he didn't know what he was doing. Mr. Henderson, I called out, walking back into his office. Is that letter ready? He handed me a crisp, cream-colored envelope. Courier is on the way. Good, I said, taking it. Because by this time tomorrow, Frank is going to learn that he bought a Ferrari but left the keys with the valet. The next morning, I didn't get out of bed until 10:00 a.m. For the first time in a decade, I didn't have to be anywhere. I made coffee, sat on my balcony, and waited. The courier confirmation had hit my email at 8:55 a.m. Package delivered. Signed for by F. Miller. At 9:02 a.m., my phone rang. Caller ID, Aerotech HQ. I let it go to voicemail. At 9:04 a.m., it rang again. Caller ID, Mom. I let that one go to voicemail too. By 9:15 a.m., my phone was vibrating so constantly it was moving across the table on its own. I took a sip of coffee, watched the birds on the feeder, and waited. I needed him to sweat. I needed him to read the letter, reread it, call his lawyer, and realize that he was standing on a trapdoor. At 9:30 a.m., a text came through from Frank. MEGAN, pick up the phone, now. Followed by, this is illegal. You can't do this. And finally, we need to talk. Come to the office. I finished my coffee. I showered. I put on my best suit, a sharp navy blazer and tailored trousers. I applied my makeup with military precision. I wasn't going there as a fired employee to beg for her job back. I was going there as the owner of the intellectual property that kept the lights on. I drove to the office, parking in the visitor lot. As I walked to the front doors, I saw the chaos. The loading bay doors were closed. The trucks that should have been loading the Titan shipments were idling, drivers standing around smoking cigarettes, looking confused. Inside, the receptionist, barely 20 years old, looked terrified. Megan, oh my God, Frank is. He's screaming, he's in the boardroom. I know, I said calmly, buzz me in. I walked down the hallway, the familiar hum of the machinery notably absent. He had stopped the line. He had to. To produce one more unit after receiving that letter would be suicide, and even Frank knew that much. I opened the boardroom doors. The scene was almost identical to the day before, but the energy was inverted. Yesterday, the room had been cold and controlled. Today, it was a disaster zone. Papers were strewn everywhere. Frank was pacing, his tie loosened, his face a mottled shade of crimson. Margaret was sitting in the same chair, but she was weeping into a tissue. When Frank saw me, he lunged toward the table, slamming his hand down. What is this? He roared, waving the cream-colored letter. What the hell is this, Megan? Good morning, Frank. Hi, Mom, I said, remaining by the door. That appears to be a formal notice revoking the licensing agreement for the Titan sensor technology. As of 9:00 a.m. today, Aerotech LLC no longer has the legal right to manufacture, market, or sell any product utilizing my patents. Your patents, Frank laughed, a high, hysterical sound. You don't have patents. The company owns the patents. I bought the company. You bought the LLC, I corrected him, keeping my voice dangerously low. You bought the building. You bought the desks. You bought the staplers. But you didn't do your due diligence, Frank. If you had looked at Schedule B of the purchase agreement, the one you likely rushed Mom into signing without a lawyer present, you would have seen that the intellectual property is held by the Arthur and Megan Family Trust. I took a step forward, and I am the sole trustee. Margaret looked up, her eyes wide. Megan, what does this mean? Frank says you're ruining us. I'm not ruining anything, Mom, I said, looking at her with a mixture of pity and anger. I'm protecting what Dad built. Frank fired me. He said he didn't need me. Well, it turns out Aerotech doesn't exist without me. The Titan sensor is 90% of our revenue. Without that license, this factory is just a warehouse full of expensive paperweights. Frank rounded the table, pointing a shaking finger at me. You little brat, this is extortion. I'll sue you. I'll sue you for corporate sabotage. Go ahead, I shrugged. My lawyer is Mr. Henderson. I believe you know him. He drafted the trust. It's ironclad, Frank. You have zero grounds. You can't sue a landlord for evicting a tenant who stopped paying rent. Or, in this case, a tenant who fired the landlord. I can have the engineers design a new sensor, Frank spat. I don't need your design. Good luck, I smiled. It took me and Dad 4 years to perfect the alloy stability. You have about, what, 2 weeks of cash flow before the payroll bounces. Do you think you can R&D a new aerospace product, get it FAA certified, and into production in 2 weeks? Frank went pale. The reality was hitting him. He wasn't looking at a speed bump, he was looking at a cliff. What do you want? He hissed. You want your job back? Fine, you're rehired, same salary, just sign the license back over. I laughed. Oh, Frank, you think I want to work for you, after you humiliated me, after you manipulated my mother? No. Then what? He screamed. I want you out, I said. I want you to resign. I want you to sign the controlling interest back to Mom. and I want you to leave this building and never come back." Frank sneered, his arrogance momentarily returning. "Never. I own 51%. You can't force me out. I'll burn this place to the ground before I give it back to a secretary and her ungrateful daughter." He turned to Margaret. "Tell her, Margaret. Tell her to stop this nonsense." Margaret looked between us. She looked at the man she had married, whose face was twisted in ugly rage, and then at her daughter, standing tall and defending the family legacy. Margaret stammered. "Megan, please, can't we work something out? Frank put a lot of money into this deal." "He didn't put money in, Mom," I said, dropping the first bomb I had discovered the night before. "He leveraged the assets. I saw the filing. He took out a $2 million loan against the building yesterday afternoon. He didn't pay you with his money. He paid you with the company's future debt." Margaret froze. "What, Frank, you said? You said it was your investment capital." "It's standard business practice," Frank yelled, sweat beading on his forehead. "Leveraged buyout, it's how it's done." "It's how you strip a company," I said. "Mom, he's drowning us in debt and now the production line is stopped. He is going to bankrupt Aerotech within a month." Frank slammed his notebook shut. "Get out, you're trespassing, I'll deal with this. I'll find a loophole, I always do." "There are no loopholes, Frank," I said, turning to leave. "Tick-tock. Every hour the line is stopped costs you $10,000. I'll be waiting for your call. But next time, speak to my lawyer." The next 3 days were a game of chicken, played out in silence and frantic legal maneuvers. I didn't go back to the factory, but I knew exactly what was happening. My loyalists were still inside. Sarah, the floor manager, texted me hourly updates. Day 1, Frank tried to force the engineers to modify the Titan sensor just enough to bypass the patent. The lead engineer, Bob, told him that changing the specs would void the FAA certification and refused to sign off on it. Frank fired him on the spot. Morale plummeted. Day 2, Frank called the key suppliers, the ones who provide the rare earth metals for the sensors, and tried to bully them into lower prices to offset the lost production time. 2 of them, who had been fishing buddies with my dad, called me immediately. I told them the truth. The company was unstable. They put Aerotech on credit hold, demanding cash upfront for all deliveries. The noose was tightening. Meanwhile, I was busy. I wasn't just sitting around waiting for Frank to fold. I was building a case to ensure that when he fell, he stayed down. I met with Mr. Henderson again. "He's not going to give up the shares voluntarily," Henderson said. "Men like Frank have egos bigger than their bank accounts. He'd rather crash the plane than let someone else land it." "Then we need to prove he committed fraud," I said. "If we can prove he misled Mom about the financing or the valuation during the sale, we can void the contract." We hired a forensic accountant, a sharp woman named Chloe who specialized in corporate piercing. She dug into the shell companies I had found. "It's a Ponzi scheme of sorts," Chloe told me over coffee on Thursday. "He uses tea. He loaned from Company B to pay the dividends to investors in Company A. He's robbing Peter to pay Paul. But Aerotech was his big score. He planned to liquidate the pension fund." My blood ran cold. "The employee pension fund?" "It's fully funded," she nodded. "About $3 million. He requested access to it yesterday. The bank flagged it because his name hasn't cleared the regulatory checks yet, but give him another week and he'll drain it." I had to act fast. If he touched that money, 30 years of my employees' savings would vanish. I called my mother. She didn't answer. I drove to her house, but Frank's car was in the driveway, and I knew he wouldn't let me in. I was blocked. Then, on Friday afternoon, the cracks in Frank's armor finally turned into a chasm. I received a phone call from an unknown number. "Is this Megan?" A woman's voice. Shaky. "Yes, this is she." "My name is Linda. I saw the LinkedIn update about Frank Miller taking over your company. I shouldn't be calling you. I signed an NDA. But is he using the Visionary Capital, LLC? I sat up straighter. He is. He did this to my father's printing business in Ohio 4 years ago. Linda said, her voice breaking. He charmed my mom, took control, and sold the printing presses for scrap. My dad had a stroke from the stress. We lost everything. I couldn't watch him do it again. Linda, I said, grabbing a pen, would you be willing to testify to that, or at least sign an affidavit? I'm scared of him. He threatened us. He can't hurt you, I said firmly. I have him cornered, but I need the nail for the coffin. If you help me, we can stop him from ever doing this to anyone else. There was a long silence, then a whisper. Okay, send me the paperwork. I hung up, my heart pounding. I had the smoking gun. But before I could call Mr. Henderson, my phone rang again. It was Sarah from the factory. She was whispering. Megan, you need to come down here. Now. What's happening? Frank is in the server room with an IT guy I've never seen before. He's trying to wipe the drives. He's screaming that if he can't make the Titan, nobody can. He's trying to delete the backups of the schematics. He was going for the scorched earth option. If he deleted the design files, even with my legal rights, it would take months to recreate the exact specs. He was trying to kill the company out of spite. I'm on my way, I said, grabbing my keys. Call security, tell Dave to stall him. Dave was fired this morning, Sarah said. It's just us. Do not let him leave that room, I commanded. I'll be there in 10 minutes. I sped toward the factory, breaking every speed limit. The legal battle was over. This was now a physical race to save the legacy my father and I had built. Frank thought he could bully a secretary's daughter. He was about to find out that he was messing with the wrong engineer. I didn't bother parking in a spot. I abandoned my car in the fire lane directly in front of the main entrance, the door still open, the engine cooling in the damp air. I badged in, thank God Sarah hadn't deactivated my access yet, and sprinted through the lobby. The silence of the factory floor was eerie. Usually, this space was a symphony of pneumatic hisses, the rhythmic clank of presses, and the hum of conveyors. Now, it was dead silent. But it wasn't empty. The entire first shift, about 40 machinists, assemblers, and QA techs, was gathered in a tight semicircle around the glass-walled server room that sat elevated in the center of the floor like a fishbowl. I pushed through the crowd. Let me through, move. They parted like the Red Sea, relief washing over their faces when they saw me. Sarah was at the front, her knuckles white as she gripped the railing. He's in there, she whispered, pointing. He locked the door from the inside. I looked up. Frank was inside the server room with a frantic-looking young man in a hoodie, the hired IT gun. Frank was red-faced, screaming and pointing at the main server rack, while the kid typed furiously on a laptop connected to the admin port. Frank saw me. He didn't look scared anymore, he looked unhinged. He smiled, a feral, desperate baring of teeth, and drew a finger across his throat. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the emergency fire axe from the wall mount next to the stairs. Megan, Sarah gasped, you can't. Watch me, I said. I ran up the metal stairs, the clang of my heels echoing in the silent factory. I reached the landing and didn't stop to knock. I swung the axe, the heavy head smashing into the tempered glass door handle. It didn't shatter the glass, but the impact destroyed the locking mechanism. The door swung open with a groan of twisted metal. Frank spun around, backing up against the server racks. Get out, security, trespassing. Stop typing, I yelled at the kid in the hoodie. Unplug that laptop right now. The kid froze, his hands hovering. Over the keyboard, he looked from the axe in my hand to Frank's purple face. Don't listen to her, Frank roared. I pay you, finish the wipe, format the drives. If you hit enter, I said, my voice deadly calm, staring directly at the kid, you are committing a felony. Destruction of corporate property, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit fraud. I have the police on the way. Do you want to go to prison for this guy? The kid slammed the laptop shut and yanked the cable. I'm out. I didn't sign up for this. He squeezed past me and bolted down the stairs. Frank was panting, trapped. He looked at the servers. the flashing blue lights holding the terabytes of data that represented my father's life work, and then at me. "It doesn't matter," Frank sneered, adjusting his suit jacket, trying to regain some semblance of control. "The company is dead anyway without the license. If I can't have it, nobody can. I'll burn it down, Megan. I'll sell the machines for scrap tomorrow." "You won't sell a single bolt," I said, stepping into the room. "I own 51%, he shouted, his voice cracking. "I am the majority shareholder." "Not anymore," a voice came from the bottom of the stairs. We both froze. Walking up the stairs, clutching the railing for support, was my mother. She looked older than I had ever seen her, frail and trembling, but her eyes were dry. Behind her was Mr. Henderson, holding a thick leather briefcase. "Margaret," Frank's face shifted instantly. The mask of the loving husband slid back into place, though it was crooked now. "Honey, thank God you're here. Megan has gone crazy. She broke in with an axe. You need to call the police." Mom reached the top of the stairs. She didn't look at me. She walked straight up to Frank. "I spoke to Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice quiet but carrying in the acoustic glass box. "He told me about the loans, about the mortgage on the factory." "It's just business, darling," Frank pleaded, reaching for her hand. "Leverage, it's how we grow. I did it for us." "And the pension fund," I interjected, stepping closer. "Did you try to drain the employee pension fund for us, Frank, or was that for your offshore account in the Caymans?" A gasp went up from the employees watching from the floor below. They heard everything. Frank flinched. "She's lying, Margaret, she's jealous. She wants to ruin our happiness." Mom pulled her hand away as if he were burning her. "Mr. Henderson showed me the transfer request, Frank. You tried to steal $3 million. You tried to steal their retirement." She gestured to the people below, men and women she had known for 20 years, people who had come to her husband's funeral. Frank stammered. "I was going to pay it back after the restructuring." "You're a con artist," Mom said, the realization finally settling in her eyes, turning them hard. "You never loved me. You loved the assets." "Margaret, don't be stupid," Frank snapped, dropping the act entirely now that he saw it wasn't working. "You signed the papers. I own this place. You can't touch me. I'll tie you up in court for years. I'll bleed you dry." Mr. Henderson stepped forward, opening his briefcase. "Actually, Mr. Miller, you won't." He pulled out a document. "This is a temporary restraining order and an injunction granted by Judge Reynolds about 20 minutes ago. Based on the affidavit provided by a Ms. Linda Kovic regarding your previous fraudulent schemes and the evidence of your attempt to embezzle the pension funds, the court has frozen your authority to act on behalf of Aerotech effective immediately." Frank stared at the paper. "Furthermore," Henderson continued, enjoying this immensely, "since the sale of the shares was predicated on financial disclosures that we can now prove were fraudulent, the contract is voidable. Margaret is exercising her right to void the sale. You don't own 51%, you don't own anything." Frank looked at the three of us. He looked down at the angry sea of faces on the factory floor. He realized, finally, that he was alone. "Fine," he spat, shoving past Mom. "Keep your dying factory. I'm done with this amateur hour anyway." He stormed down the stairs. But the crowd didn't part this time. The machinists, burly men and women with grease on their hands and steel-toed boots, stood shoulder to shoulder. They formed a wall. "Get out of my way," Frank barked. "I think you should wait," Sarah said, crossing her arms. "The police are pulling into the lot right now." Through the front glass windows, blue and red lights began to flash, washing over the factory floor. Frank slumped against the railing, defeated. I dropped the axe. My hands were shaking. I looked at my mother. She covered her mouth, a sob escaping, and collapsed into my arms. "I'm so sorry," she wept into my shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Megan. I didn't see it. I didn't see it." "It's okay, Mom," I whispered, holding her tight, looking out over tea. Factory I had just saved. "It's over. He can't hurt us anymore." The fallout was messy, but swift. Frank was arrested in the parking lot for attempted embezzlement and fraud. It turned out Aerotech wasn't the only iron he had in the fire. The investigation opened a Pandora's box of scams across 3 states. He wouldn't be seeing the inside of a boardroom or the outside of a cell for a very long time. The next few months were the hardest of my professional life. Frank had done significant damage in his short tenure. He had burned bridges with suppliers, confused our customers, and saddled us with legal fees. But we had something Frank didn't: loyalty. The suppliers, once I explained the situation and showed them the court orders, lifted the credit holds. They knew my father. They knew me. They knew that Aerotech paid its bills. The employees were the real heroes. Knowing that the cash flow was tight while we untangled Frank's mess, the senior staff voluntarily deferred their bonuses. "Just get the Titan line running again, boss," Sarah told me. "We'll worry about the extra stuff later." And we did. 3 months after the showdown, I stood in the main office. It didn't look like Frank's office anymore. I had removed the pretentious leather chair and the wet bar he had installed. I brought back my father's old drafting table and my world's okayest boss mug, which I had glued back together. It leaked a little, but I kept it as a reminder. There was a knock on the door. It was Mom. She looked better. She was seeing a therapist, working through the guilt and the manipulation. She had stepped down from the board completely, transferring the ownership of the LLC to me officially. "I was a good wife to an inventor," she had told me, "but I am not a business owner. This belongs to the person who builds the future." "Hey," she said, holding a bottle of champagne. "Is it too early?" I checked my watch. "It's 5:00 p.m. somewhere. What are we celebrating?" "I just got off the phone with Mr. Henderson," she smiled. "The bank approved the refinancing. Frank's toxic loans are gone. We're in the clear." I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 90 days. "We're safe." "We're safe," she confirmed. She poured 2 glasses and handed me one. To Arthur, he knew exactly what he was doing. I looked at the framed patent on the wall, the piece of paper that had served as the shield for everything we loved. "To Dad," I said, clinking my glass against hers. I walked to the window and looked out at the factory floor. The rhythm was back. The sparks from the welders were flying, the conveyors were humming, and the first shipment of the new Titan sensors was being loaded onto the truck. Frank had tried to strip this place for parts. He thought value was just numbers on a balance sheet. He never understood that the real value wasn't the machines or the building. It was the people who knew how to run them, and the family that would fight to the death to protect them. I took a sip of champagne, watched the truck pull away, and finally, for the first time in a long time, I relaxed. I was back where I belonged,